Lisa, we are so happy to have you here. It's been really fun, even just like doing the sound check. We're just chatting and having a lot of fun. And Mike was like, hey, we should probably start recording the actual podcast. We're like, okay.
And everyone should know that my dad is a big fan of Lisa Valentine Clark.
I'm a big fan of your dad. That's what everyone should know.
Anyway, fans all around.
Thanks.
Great. Well, Lisa, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
I'm Lisa Valentine Clark. I host a podcast, The Lisa Show, and the Council of Moms. I have 5 kids. What else do you want to know?
What is the Council of Moms?
So that's another podcast that I do where you get a bunch of women together to figure it out. You know what I mean?
You
got a big question.
Problems.
Well, that's what I always joke that we do. Like, motherhood is overwhelming and nobody can do it alone, right? So I love to pattern like what I do in my real life, which is if I have a question, something that's really pressing, especially in, motherhood or in my life or in relationships, I'm going to Google a couple of articles. I'm going to do some research, read some books, sure. But what I'm really going to do is to go to the women that I trust who've been through it, who have a different life experience than me, and then say, what do I do? And
how did you become that kind of person who cares enough and then builds something? That's really cool.
That's so nice of you to say. I think this is a great way to maybe introduce my intentions of who I am. I think life is all about connections and relationships and people. And I've always been like that since I was little. And it's just gotten worse and worse as I've gotten older. But I think the dream is that all of my friends will be friends with each other. Right. And you just connect together. And I just think that's the best way to live.
That's very lovely.
And what's your connection to the LGBTQ Latter-day Saint space?
Yeah, you bet. I'm a big fan.
We're pretty rad.
Well, yes. All growing up, I grew up doing theater and
are you saying there's gays in theater?
I'm saying that, yes. And so my whole life has been blessed, absolutely blessed by knowing some of the best people in the world, my friends. And then I have some children who are in the LGBTQ plus community, and they have brought with them a community of friends that I love now as well. And so again, that community that I just talked about is expanding, and it has just blessed my life. And so I feel just privileged to be, a part of this community.
What's that like as a mom to have your children come out?
Well, it's that's such a great question because it's so many things. It's just like asking, what's it like to raise kids? It's great. And it's what I always, kind of wanted. I always wanted to be a mom, always wanted to be, to raise kids, and having my kids come out, especially like my oldest son came out first and at about 15 and came out. I always laugh because it wasn't dramatic like I wanted it to be. Like I wanted this moment, and this just real moment that we would come together and we would cry and just say how much we loved each other. And it would be like this meaningful life moment, like from a movie. Mm-hmm. I'll admit it. That's kind of what I hoped for. And what I got was this real sort of matter of fact, oh, hey, yeah, we want to talk to you about something. My husband and I wanted to talk to him about something, basically something that he'd broken a family rule. And it wasn't like a big deal, but it was something that we needed to talk about. And so we were talking about it, and he was like, yeah, okay. And then at the end, he's like, oh, and yeah, and also, I'm gay. Sorry. Anyway. And then I was like, we love you. I was like, this is my moment.
This is it.
And he's like, yeah, I know. Also, I have to get back to school. Okay, so cool. And we were like, yeah, okay. And my husband laughed so hard. He was like, that's first of all, so like my kid. So like Miles, like my oldest. He's just always like, what? This is just how it is. Like, and he's also, that wasn't the moment that you were hoping for, was it? Kind of teasing me. But I look back at that now and I think that was actually really a privilege to be part of that conversation, that he felt so confident that it could be, I have been thinking about this thing. I do need to tell you this, but also I gotta go to school.
It can be
now
casual.
the way that he did it actually like is so perfect.
Yeah. How wonderful that he was comfortable enough with you to be casual about it and that it wasn't a huge thing.
That it wasn't this. And I'm sure, and I know now that there were some internalized feelings, some things that he had been wrestling with, and we had subsequent conversations, obviously, about that and things like that. But I just have not had maybe what I would think is a typical experience in mothering, in my marriage, in my family, and so why would him coming out be typical?
Any different? Yeah. I actually love that you said that. It's kind of a good segue into what we're going to talk about today. Like, what do you do when you're grieving, or like when the life you're living doesn't match the life you had planned? And I think to some extent that's going to happen to everyone.
Yeah.
However, this is something that is really hard for a lot of LGBTQ people in the church because there's such like a life path prescribed.
Yeah.
And then when you feel like you were born outside of that life path, or like the way things are moving aren't what you expected in your relationships with yourself and your religion, with your family. Mm-hmm. What do you do? What do you do with the pain and the complexity that lives there?
Yeah. And, it's a very common model that people are familiar with, that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with, the stages of grief, which are, what are they? Depression, denial, anger, bargaining, and acceptance, that I think we go through as we experience the grief, the loss of the life we thought we would have. And also there's a term I've come to know and love, which is called ambiguous loss, which is where there's not a concrete loss, but just like this loss that has happened or occurred, and you feel loss, but you can't quite pinpoint it. And I came across the term when I was learning about my mom and Alzheimer's, and it's an experience that we have because she's still present, but she's gone. Mm-hmm. And so she's lost, but still here.
Yeah, that's so hard.
And then there's also anticipatory grief, like, well, I thought we were going to have this experience, but this didn't happen. So you grieve something that you thought was going to happen, but then never did happen. So it's like the loss of the thing you thought you would have. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my question for you, Lisa, is a really big one, which is what does grief look like for you right now?
This is a huge question. And this is something that I think about a lot. When I think about grief and what grief looks like, I frame that in the only way that I can really express it is because of the loss of my husband. That to me is grief, the life, not, losing him and losing the father of my children, losing my best friend, losing someone who I've been having a conversation with since I was young. Mm-hmm. And all of the changes. And when he died, everything changed. So that is how I see grief. And I know that for this conversation, we're talking about lots of things, right? And what parents in particular, experience when you think, well, I didn't think that was going to happen. And I do think that they're different. I don't want to diminish anyone else's experience, mm-hmm. but when someone says I'm grieving the loss of, I just think, I didn't know what grief really, really was until his passing. I had the anticipatory grief because he lived with a terminal disease for 4.5 years, and I watched him slowly decline and be unable to move and speak in a very slow progression. And that was painful and, in words that it's kind of hard to describe. But after he was gone too, that kind of grief that is overwhelming of, that's it, he's gone, that's it. There's no 50th wedding anniversary on the horizon. There's no father for your children as they're making really important decisions as young adults. There's no date nights. There's no conversation about the weather. There's nothing. That's it. There's no hope. So for me, that is that's my experience with grief. And so when people say, I'm grieving this loss, I think when it's not a person that you're grieving, but a dream or a hope or plans, it's different. Mm-hmm. It's different. It's like grief with a lowercase g. Mm-hmm. It's a disappointment. It's a sadness, which is not to diminish it because and I don't want to diminish anyone's experience, but I can't see it any other way now. When people say I'm grieving, anything other than the loss of a person, to me, it's different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what I'm hearing you say, Lisa, is even though you had all this time to prepare,
Oh
like
yeah, it
emotionally
doesn't
prepare,
matter.
like when it happened, it was just, it sounds shocking almost.
Oh yeah. In fact, he had a terminal disease. I cared for him for 4.5 years as he slowly deteriorated. I watched I knew more right before my eyes, and I was so surprised at how shocked I was that he actually died. I just don't think that you can ever prepare anybody for that. I think that is what grief is. And, a lot of people say that grief is, so intense because there's great love and with nowhere to go. Right. And I definitely think that is connected to it. So again, I don't, it changed it changed everything, right? It changed my relationship with everybody. So when people say, oh, did you think your life was going to look like this, X, Y, Z? Those kinds of losses, like what I do for a living is different. How I parent my children is different. My friendships are different. How I eat dinner is different. Every little thing is different. And those things are not as difficult to deal with then as the loss of someone. So, those stages of grief that you mentioned before, they were actually created for a person who is who's looking at death. They were not, those stages of grief were not really created for those who are living, right? And I thought a lot about that. I tried to sort of crack the code on grief. My idea is I'll read all the books on grief. That will help me get through grief more quickly. And I remember I had this big stack of books. I was like, I'm going to read all of them, and all the books about the afterlife, all the books, everything. I had these 2 huge stacks of books about all this. And my sister came over and she's like, what are you doing? What's this situation? She's like, are you trying to figure out grief? You trying to crack the code? And I was like, yeah, clearly this is exactly what I want to do, because this feels horrible. And someone needs to tell me how to get this out. And what I found were some beautiful expressions of grief so that I felt less alone in it, but there's no answer to that. But again, that's grief for a person. And
that, you said you just want to get rid of that feeling. What was it that you had to get rid of it?
What does it feel like?
It feels like you're dying. I feel like when he died, I died. And it feels like being cracked wide open, that kind of grief.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Truly.
I really don't want to sugarcoat it, because that didn't help me in my darkest moments. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there are still waves of grief like that of saying, not only is this not what I imagined it to be, but it's this sense of home, this sense of connection, this sense of this person who is a witness to my life, who I built a life with. Again, the father of my children. It's a different kind of a loss that you only know theoretically until you go through it. And so what has helped me show up is, I remember thinking, well, I can't have my kids lose both of their parents, right? So the love of my children, and also the final wishes of my late husband, which was, because I used to sort of joke, I could not see past his death. I could always, I knew it was terminal, but I was always trying to think about how to make him comfortable for the next stage. And he had some wishes about how I would go on and live my life. And I was always like, well, nice for you to say, but I don't have to do anything you say, because I'm a delight. And I said, maybe I'll just stay in my bed and cry and never get out. And he's like, I don't know if you're kidding or not, and he'd type it on his little screen, and I'd be like, funny thing, I don't know if I'm kidding or not. I really don't know any. And he said to me, you don't honor our life together. You don't honor our love, our relationship, our family, all the things that we believe by doing that. Just know you can do whatever you want, but that doesn't honor, any of this. That's just for you. And I just thought, oof, that's a little bit of some tough love, but I can see now the sort of the wisdom in that.
Well, even that sounds really hard though, because it's almost like this task. It's like this homework as you're going through that capital G grief.
Yes.
That's
felt like it.
That's a lot on your system, on your brain, on your heart.
Oh yeah. There are so many things that I've learned since of like caregiver burnout, anticipatory grief, trauma, and now that I've had time for my nervous system to sort of slow down from that, then I realized that being able to let go and really like just sit with it and become friends with grief and to acknowledge it instead of trying to solve it, to push it away, to stuff it down is the only way to really to live with it. And so talking about it is part of that. So I appreciate you asking, even though it's
Well, I appreciate your
it's
vulnerability.
overwhelming.
Yeah. I'd love to understand more what it looks like to be a friend of grief. Like let it be like a welcome guest. Cause I have a friend who is going through a divorce right now and they were saying, I think I'm just going to be sad forever.
Right. You have to sort of say the things outside, like, outside of yourself, outside of your head, and have witnesses to it. Because I would say things like that, especially in the beginning, and people would be like, oh, no. You know, they wanted to make it better, but it didn't feel true. And when people were, and that's why I think when I read accounts like C.S. Lewis wrote about grief, there's so many great authors who just say it. Another description is the anxiety is the forgotten stage of grief. If I felt like I'd forgotten something bad was going to happen. I've learned since that that's a trauma response, and there's lots of things that you can do to calm your body. I couldn't trust my brain for a while. I had a lot of intrusive thoughts. Again, that's a trauma response, which grief is sometimes a part of. And so I think friends being that space to say, I'm going to say something, and this is how I really, really feel, and I just need you to hear it. And for them to say, just to listen, just to be a witness of it, actually helped.
You've used that word witness multiple times. What does it mean to you?
To be really seen, to be seen, right? For who you are, warts and all, right? Everyone needs that. Everyone loves that. I think maybe that's to go back to the first, story about my son coming out. For anyone that comes out to you, they're asking you to be a witness to their life. They're saying, this thing about me that maybe not everybody gets to know, but I want you to know. How will you hold that? How will you carry that? That's important. That is life and death important.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how someone did that for you?
Yeah, sure. I have a really good friend, Casey, who she was just sitting in the dark in my house the night that my husband died, just sitting there. I didn't know she was there. And after he had passed, after my children and I had a time with that initial shock, and there are people to call, there are things to be done. Once we started doing that, I just got a text from her that said, don't be alarmed, but I'm just sitting in the dark in your living room because I just felt like maybe you would need me here. Mm-hmm. The last couple of days had been there, just to be there. And it was one of those moments where I didn't know that I needed someone else to be there for me because I was there for my children, but I wasn't even cognizant about how to ask for that. And she just was there. Mm. She didn't say anything or do anything. She just was there. I don't even remember what we talked about that night, or, she was just there. And since then I've had conversations with her and a couple of other very close friends and my sister Gina, where I'll say all the things, all the horrible things. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I think, whether it's true or not, your brain tells you. And I would just say them out. And the thing that I love about her and my sister Gina is they will say, that sounds horrible. If that were me, I don't know if I could do it. That sounds like the worst thing in the world. Period. End of sentence. And nobody says that to you when you're like, I have this really hard thing. Let me tell you this really, really hard thing. Usually they're like, oh, that's bad. But have you thought about that? Let me cheer you up.
It's okay. The resurrection.
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. Just think about when this thing will happen in the future, when we don't know when it will happen. And then it will be okay at some future event that I can't tell you when. And you're like, yeah, no, I know. But right now, it feels like I might die. I feel like I might be, and so for someone to say, that sounds horrible, I would hate that. and I've never experienced that, is somehow
It's validating.
it just calmed me to be like, yeah, okay, I'm not overreacting. This is the worst thing. This is the worst thing.
Can I ask you a question that I've wondered? Because, I've heard people say similar things, like it's important to like have someone to be there. But I have friends who were like, I don't know, like tier 2 friends.
Yes.
Like I know them, I love
saying.
them, but
Sure.
they're not someone I like call on the phone,
They're not in the circle.
Yeah, exactly. But
they're in the outer
But they're going
circle.
through a tough time and I want to like be there for them.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what to do. So I had a friend whose parent recently passed away and I just called and left a message and I would have talked to them, but I said, hey, love you. I know this is hard. Like, I just want you to say,
great.
And I said, you don't need to call me back. I just want you to know that I'm here. And they didn't call me back, but I was like, is that the right thing to do?
I think so. I mean, it would be for me. I got a lot of texts and, phone calls or letters. And you know what? That whole thing, you don't need to call me back. You don't need to respond to that, is such a gift because you're not giving that person whose world is just totally upended a task, something else to do. Because it's not about them. It's just, I wanted you to know that. One of the most meaningful things is a friend in kind of the second tier. 3 months after Chris passed, came over with a gift and handwritten individual notes for each one of my kids. And again, this isn't somebody that I know super well, but he had said, my dad died when I was young. And I remember about 3 months, everyone forgot and moved on with their lives. And as a kid, that really, really bothered me. So I always try to wait and offer condolences a little bit later. Yeah. And I remember that was really helpful. That was kind, and again, here's something for you I haven't forgotten, was just a witness.
Yeah.
It felt good to be remembered.
Mm-hmm. I keep thinking about all the tasks. I don't know why that's like striking me right now, but I'm like, you lost your person, you lost your partner, and then you have to plan and manage and do logistics and be there for your kids and be a mom and be a sister and a daughter still and like all of these extra things. I'm so sorry that like that to validate that sounds horrible.
It's so funny,
so
just
awful.
I remember thinking, that's so generous of you to say. It's so weird, but it's to say life goes on and life goes on.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's comforting to say, and life goes on. Like it still goes, but then you're like, oh, life goes on. Like I still have a job. My kids still need health insurance. They are grieving. They need me. I'm their person. It is physically and emotionally exhausting.
Well, and that sounds so like dissociative too. Like, I feel like if that was happening to me, I would have to just be like, you know what, grief, I don't have time for you right now. But that also feels horrible. It's because, oh, wow, that's awful.
It is really like so I've seen a lot of people grieve differently. And I've certainly, I remember, so obviously I was on leave from my job and they were like, take as much time as you need. And after 3 weeks, I was like, I have to go back to work or I'm going to go crazy. Yeah. This is not helping. This is not helping just sitting here and thinking about this. And going back to work was good for that time. What I wish is, I think you get like for most jobs, like 3 bereavement grit days or something, which is like ridiculous. And yes, you do need them at the beginning. I just happen to have a really, really understanding, work situation. And sometimes like you need it like a year later, but it's not socially appropriate to be like, hey, I'm actually going through and things have slowed down. I had a really big grief wave. It sort of knocked me off my feet for about 4 months. Most people don't know. I can hide it really, really well. But like it was bad. And it came because all of my kids were doing really well. I looked around, they'd all been to therapy. They'd all been through some hard stuff. And there were places in their lives where they were all doing really, really well. And it wasn't a constant, I got to check in, I got to check. And I realized, and I felt something in me relax. And then it was like an
open space for that to come back.
The bottom gave out again.
And it wasn't that you were seeing your kids happy and thriving. It was that you didn't have to put in all this effort to take care of them.
Yeah, there was time and space
you
for
got to see what you were experiencing.
Yeah, and I think that that's more common than we really realize.
Yeah. I think
'Cause
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Because grief is so unpredictable. You know, we think, well, they should be better. It's been a year. Well, they should be better. It's been 4 years. They should be better. And because better and grief are not,
Well, I feel like that's
it's
just
not like a sickness.
kind of a cruel way to look at it. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
as if grief is something that should be healed from rather
Yeah.
than something that should be invited.
Yeah, befriended.
Yeah. Like what you were saying, like
You just learn how to, it does
holding
change you.
it. Yeah.
I remember thinking this, like, I don't want it to change me. Like I liked who I was before. I liked my old life. Like, what if I change so much that I lose more? I lose friends. I lose work opportunity. I lose hobbies. I lose lots of things. And the fact is you will, because that's life. Life changes. Grief just accelerates that.
Yeah.
And it just makes you not be able to hide from it. But everybody experiences that to some degree.
As I was driving over here, there were two of the many songs I listened to. One was "Come Ye Disconsolate," that hymn, and also a song called "There Are Angels." Mm-hmm. And it talks about how there are angels watching over us, and like God knows as a sparrow falls, so of course He'll notice us, and like the Creator of the universe knows our names. I can imagine someone saying something to you like, "Well, God knows you; He's aware of you," or like, "Christ felt this; He knows what that's like." Was any of that comforting to you during that time, or even now, or is it just hard to even conceptualize that,
I don't
that God's
know.
there
I
for
think
you?
my personality, I don't like people telling me what my relationship is with God or what it should be. I think I know. Like, I don't know. Like, there's always this, like, don't tell, like, and I think in that question, or when people talk about it, their intention is, I want to offer you some hope. Mm-hmm. And also, I think when people say things to grieving people, they're also trying to figure it out themselves. It's almost like they're throwing some spaghetti to the wall to see what is going to stick. Mm-hmm. Like, well, there's a plan. This is part of the plan. Or he's probably right next to you, watching over you. They're trying to figure it out too. And I've learned not to internalize that, right? I just think, oh, that's none of my business what's going on, as you are trying to offer me something kind. So I will take it as such. I'll take it as a kindness. But sometimes, depending on what mood I'm in, I might say, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Sure. Okay. I mean, are we just throwing out theories? Because I know what I think. I know God knows my name. I've had some when you're at the bottom of what you thought you could physically endure, or emotionally, and you remember those moments, and I can say, and I do love to say that God never left me, that God was with me at my lowest. It still is, when no one else could be. And so I feel but that feels very personal to me. Like, like, yeah. yes, I know, mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean it's not hard.
Right.
It almost sounds like in a way that like sprinkling hope on someone's grief doesn't work. Yeah. Yeah. Like it seems like what you're saying for you, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but you needed someone to be in that trench with you and just sit there. And that's what helped you.
Yeah. I think I need somebody to acknowledge the reality of the situation and not try to rush me through it, because there's no rushing to it. And
I love that you were saying that the reason we rush people is because we don't want to be in that same place.
Because we're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or a lot of people will want to say things and put it on you because they think, well, that sounds horrible. If I were okay, tell me what you learned so that I don't have to go through it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
And that doesn't work, but I can see it now. I can see what they're trying to do, of like, oh, just give me all of my hard-earned wisdom and pain and suffering that I've learned so that you don't that's not how it works.
And also that, again, is coming from the mindset of grief is a bad thing.
Yes. Yeah. And yes, exactly. And when, we talk about all the time in our faith tradition that Christ was well acquainted with grief. The perfect deity is well acquainted. That should give us an indication that is going to be our birthright as well.
I think just like a sign to me, I'm learning a lot from you. Just thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
But like, I think one of the signs to me that you're well acquainted with grief is that you were able to say some of this is capital G and some of this is lowercase g.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think the lowercase g is the capital.
Yes.
And a lot of and that's awkward.
I did.
That's awkward, right?
Yeah.
And even you're saying like the questions that we're getting that have like sparked this conversation about grief, you're like, that's some lowercase stuff. And
Yeah.
it's important.
It's important. And the worst
But it's kind of
thing
like a
that has
different
happened to
thing.
you is the worst thing.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm all for, even if someone else is like, oh, that's nothing, like, no, that needs to be honored. And,
Right.
and I think that, words matter. I love stories. I was an English major, a former English teacher. Like, we were just talking about books before we started this. Stories matter, right? And when you are at a life-changing moment, right? Which is grief or dealing with it, or like an internal change about how you see the world, which grief forces you to do. You don't want someone to come up to you and say, well, just tell me what you've learned at the end. Just skip to the end. You're like, no, this is it. This is life right now. And and what I've learned is that you can bring on more suffering for yourself. I can hurt my feelings so easily now, right? Just by imagining certain things and giving into fear. We all can. I just have a really good imagination.
You're like,
I can really hurt my feelings in an excellent way. Like, that is, anyway, not something I should brag about. But part of that is either living in the past or living in the future, right? And I've really found that the way to live and to move forward with grief, so this is a great thing that you can do as a friend and as yourself, is to live in the present, is to get your body, your mind, your spirit in the present, because this is where it's at. Mm-hmm. We were all put on this earth to live this life, right? And if we're all saying, hey, this is your path, and this is, all of these trials or grief or problems, or to change your mind or whatever, this is part of it. Mm-hmm. This is why, this is like central to our doctrine. Then you've got to, we should have more of a commitment to live in the present than anyone. Yeah. Live in the present. We love to live in the future because we're like, oh, it'll all make sense in the future. It'll all be taken care of in the future. But we can take that hope and say, yeah, maybe. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, that's what I hope for. But we have to live in the present.
Yeah, that's even physiologically true.
Yes.
Like, that is like fact. That's how our nervous systems work.
Yeah, this is why I now do breath work and Pilates and yoga, and because it forces me and shocks me back into living in the present. Stuff that I never did before.
Yeah, it's back into that parasympathetic nervous system where emotions can be passed. Like, you can't process emotions. And grief that's like a big, like, your window of tolerance to pass grief needs to be insanely huge. Yeah. Right? And yeah, that's interesting how, like, if you are in that fight or flight or a depressed mode, you need to give yourself space and not be like, this grief should just go away right now. It literally can't.
No,
right?
Yeah.
And your system
You're
needs
making it worse.
Time.
Yeah.
And like to be able to come back into that state. Yeah. And then it's still going to suck.
Yeah.
But you can start kind of processing a little bit. It sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you're talking about little lowercase g, because I want to be really clear too on this podcast, having this conversation with you, that I do not grieve that my children are LGBTQ. Yeah. I'm not grieving that. I don't see that as a trial. I don't see that as a hardship. I see it as a blessing. Mm-hmm. And it's really important that I say that, and that I'm very clear about that.
Yeah. Is that how you viewed it from the very beginning?
Yeah, I think so. Initially there was this shock and I had this panic. And what I've realized is I'm like, is that grief? I didn't think of it at the time. What I know it is now, looking back, is that I was afraid. I was scared, because even though I knew how I felt about the issue, I know how God feels about it in regards to me and my family, and I've have had a personal, very positive, some of my best friends, now my children, like, this is how I see it. I see this is who they are, just like any other characteristic. But initially I felt panic, especially my oldest kid coming out. And I thought, oh no, what do I teach him now? Because that speaks to me and my ego of like, I have to be the one to prepare them for the world. Now it's different because there's something different about him that I wasn't anticipating. So how do I change what I teach him spiritually, intellectually, in the life? I found myself getting really worked up about it. Like, I don't know if I'm prepared for this, because now here is something that we're different on. I can't say, oh, when I went through this is totally new. And he's so young. And I also had a lot of fear, and anticipatory disappointment in how other people will react. Mm-hmm. I thought, and that mama bear started really coming out of like, I'm going to shield him from all of this. How can I shield him from anyone ever thinking that he's anything less than my perfect little boy, how I see him. Yeah. And so that was initially but that was something that I knew that I needed to deal with and that I needed to figure out, and that I didn't need to put that on him. And what I came to learn through, again, all my research, you probably see a little bit of a pattern. Read a lot of books.
Your stacks of books.
Listen, and I got another stack of books, and also through a lot of prayer. I was like, what should I teach him? How should I tell him his life path? Because here's another thing too, is that I felt like as a mom, I needed to prepare him, like I was preparing him. Like all my kids, like I wanted them to have a mission experience. I wanted them to get married in the temple. I wanted them to give me lots of grandchildren. These are things that I really wanted, right? And I had a really, really great, just wonderful personal experience in prayer one night, as I'm just pouring it out. Like, okay, so what do I tell them? I maybe this, not this for sure, because I've had a lot of friends who were dedicated to the gospel and gay and married women, and it was not good. And it was not good. And I couldn't pretend like that was going to be an option. And I thought, okay, that's a blessing because I've been able to see that. Okay, so what should I tell them, this or this? Or, because there's a million paths. And the answer that I got was, well, you don't get to tell any of your children any of this. So why would it be different for Miles? Why would it be different for this kid? Yeah. It was a humbling experience of like, oh yeah, I want to help. I want to prepare the path. And a good friend has reminded me, and her words came back to me of like, you don't prepare the path for your kid. You prepare the kid for the path. Mm-hmm. They're going to all have their own path, and all you have to do is love them. And, through that experience, the love that I had from my child, and for all my children, just absolutely, it increased, which as a mom, I didn't think that was possible, mm-hmm. but it did. I felt such an intense love, and thought, what a privilege it is that I get to be his mom. Mm-hmm. And that's how I feel about all of my kids. And so that was an important part of that coming out for me, because it helped me to put my mind on, okay, what is the focus, and what's the focus here? What is my role as their mom now? It's different than what I thought it was going to be, but it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like your kids are so lucky to have you.
Oh, you're so nice. I'm lucky. They're really funny kids too. Also very entertaining. You have
funny children? I wouldn't even imagine.
They're very entertaining.
So, you've had this like capital G grief. You have this strong conviction that your kids, like, this isn't a mistake. This isn't a trial. This isn't a problem. Like, this is a blessing.
Yeah.
What do you do? Like, having experienced this big grief, and then this view of your children, that this is a beautiful thing. And then you have a friend who their kid comes out and they're like, oh, this is the hardest thing that's ever happened to me. Like, how do you, who has experienced different grief and a different experience with your children, how do you sit with someone who to them, this is the worst thing that has happened to them?
thank you for asking me that. I don't think anyone's ever asked me
That's
that
a really
before.
good question.
That's a really good question because I've had that experience. I have that experience right now. I just have two people popping in my head. And I think anytime someone comes to me and says, hey, I have this hard thing and I don't know what to do about it, I think, wow, I'm so honored you would come to me, honestly. And I realize my perspective, my life is different than a lot of people's. So I don't expect everyone to come with it at the same. Just like, we all can't have the same experiences in life, and that's why I think it's so great to, when someone will share with you like their experiences, because it's like you get to be connected with them and you get to learn from theirs as well. So I don't think anyone coming to me, I wouldn't be like, oh, you think that's hard? Get over it. Like I would never, because again, I have friends who've been through harder things than I've been through, and they don't do that to me. And actually they save me. So I know what that feels like too. Like we're all in this like little spinning circle of like, I'm going through this. I know it's not as hard as and I always stop people from saying that because it makes it seem like I think I'm better or that I have some secret knowledge that somebody else does. And I don't think that about myself. But I do think that it's so great when we talk about the hard things in our lives, right? So if somebody's coming out or they're saying, my kid this is hard. And it might be hard for different reasons because they've had a different background or they have a different perspective or a different marriage or a different family of origin or a million other different things that I don't know. And so no one wins the game of, oh, you think that's bad? I have it hard. Like no one wins. No one wins. And so I would meet that person with so much compassion and would think it was an honor for them to just be able to lay it out in a safe place without any judgment and then to talk it through. Because one thing that I do think is if somebody is scared, it's just because it's the unknown. It's just because they don't know, and that's okay. And like, that's a normal way to feel, and we shouldn't feel bad about how we feel. But what we do with it next is what's important, What is your objective? I know it is to love your kid, to have a happy family. Those are things that you can have. Let's talk about that,
Do you think the same principles apply to the big G grief, capital G, as the lowercase?
Yeah, I do.
So when you're seeing that person, you're like, oh, it'll be fine. Like things are better.
Like, yeah, don't even worry.
Your kid's going to be fine.
No,
and,
you always meet
right.
the person, I think, where they're at, not where you are. Because when you're desperate, it doesn't matter if you don't want somebody to measure it. When you're desperate and you're upset and you need help, then you need help. You need somebody to get down on the floor and meet you where you are and just say, tell me why this is hard. Share that with me and have it be in a compassionate, non-judgmental way. That's the way, that one by one, that, we talk so much about ministering and we think it's like an organization thing or that it's a task, but that's what it is. It's one by one.
As you've been talking, I've been thinking about I have this natural tendency to want to fix people's problems, which I think is pretty normal.
Oh yeah, totally.
And let's work through this. Let's get this thing done. And then also the times I've tried to do that and the times I've just sat with people and let them be sad and be sad and grieve with them. And I want to do more of that, but there's this thing I've experienced again and again. I just experienced it this last week with a friend who's going through a really tough time. And when I got home, after we talked for 10 minutes,
yeah.
I got home, I said a prayer for her. And I felt like God loves her. And I also felt and I love you. I just felt that. And I think that it didn't fix that problem and it didn't take away the sadness I was feeling for her, but just the sense of love amidst this terrible loss.
Yeah. I think that's so significant. We talk so much about being Christ-like, right? And following Christ. And I feel like the thing that I want to be like Christ is that he never diminished anyone. He cried with people. He didn't say, "Why are you crying? I'm going to raise Lazarus like right now.
This will be fixed like in a minute."
It's going to be fixed in a minute. I think about that all the time.
Christ
Like,
is, like
he would
if we're
never
saying the
shame
resurrection,
anybody.
Like Christ didn't
and
even
he would,
do that, and he is
well,
the resurrection.
And he didn't go around saying, "I'm right here. I'm literally perfect, and I am gonna do what I said I was gonna do." And but
like, I see you're looking for hope.
yeah,
Here it
I'm
is.
right here. And in fact, the touching of the garment, he goes right to the person and sees him. Mary and Martha, he says he goes right there. He's right there where they are. He doesn't diminish anything. And it just really speaks to what it is. Sometimes when we're asking for, especially in grief, we're asking for, somebody help me. Somebody help me. I don't even know with what. Like, just help. You don't know. And just having somebody there with you that says, I am with you in this. We can figure it out together instead of, good luck. Try these 3 tips. And maybe that'll help. See ya. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. And so I think to your question, and also to your being just there for your friend, that we overcomplicate what it is that we need. Sometimes we need that in that moment. I think I read a study that said that when you're feeling horribly depressed or you've got a problem, you just need just talking to somebody for 7 minutes will make you feel better. It's like 7 minutes. No, it's 8. I think it's 8. Because I remember one of my friends.
I was going to call it 7 minutes in heaven.
Yeah. Well, we could all use that too. Let's be clear.
Existential crisis.
But it was like, and one of my friends once texted me, "Hey, let me know if you ever need 8 minutes." And I knew what that meant. And that just felt so great. I think what we need to do is, instead of giving more advice, is to ask better questions.
Yeah, I love that.
One thing I was thinking when you were talking about the Savior and the way he dealt with people's grief, I'm also always so impressed by the mindfulness there and how he never got offended. And there were so many things to be offended by. Like, this is...
You think that's bad?
Right. Like this is literally Christ, right?
Yes.
And even when you asked that question, Ben, you're like, what about a parent who's like, my kid came out and this is ruining my life? I was like, please, there's defensiveness there. And because I'm imagining this
and again, your feelings are valid though too, I want to say
for
too.
Sure. Right. But it's like having the presence of mind to be like, this is what's happening. This is how I'm responding right now, and not going too far back or too far forward or getting anxious or assuming things. It's just like staying in that moment and realizing I reacted to this.
That tells me something.
That tells me something about me.
Yep.
Not about them.
Nope. It gives you more information about your reactions, give you a lot of information about yourself.
And I think about the Savior, and it seems like this wasn't always easy, right? And he also modeled how to slow things down. When they're going to stone the woman who was taken in adultery, rather than being like, he just slowed it down. Like, he didn't fight. He just made everyone breathe, made everyone calm. And then they were able to get back into what I imagine is a more secure nervous system.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. He slowed things down and he sat with them. He sat with the accusers.
Yeah.
Who I'm sure he was furious with. I mean,
yeah,
I would have been, but he sat down with them and he tried to direct their thoughts in a different way.
Right.
To get them to think about something that they had never thought about before. And I think that we can do that when we have the right reserves. And I think sometimes we do need to go off in our own wilderness for a minute and maybe not be around people for a little bit, but not for long, not keeping ourselves isolated from other people. But I think that gives us a kind of a reflection that has definitely been modeled by the Savior.
But I think that grows your capacity too.
Absolutely.
When you're able to sit with the accused and the accuser, when you're able to sit with yourself and your weird feelings about a situation and the other person and their opposite weird feelings about a situation. And then I'm maybe ranting a little bit, or rambling a little bit, but thinking about what you were saying about looking at your kid and saying, I want to protect them from everything, but I can't. I think that's I hope this is okay to say, but I think we might need a little bit more of that in this space, because so many of us want to live a life that is completely free of oppression.
Yeah.
And so many parents in this space are like, I don't want anyone to ever say anything mean to my kid. I don't want them to be bullied for being gay. That's not realistic. It's not going to happen. And I think by doing that to our kids, like overprotecting or creating this expectation that everyone is always like, that we always feel like we perfectly belong and nothing's ever like, that's not going to lead to any sort of resilience or confidence at all.
It's just not realistic.
It's not real. And so it's like constantly look like, where are we at? And yes, like people should feel safe and protected. And they also like, I want to feel safe and protected, but I also want the resilience to have the confidence that I'm enough when I'm not.
Ooh,
But
yeah.
does that make sense?
Yes,
Like
100%.
if someone threatens my
That's what I
belonging-
want for my kids. That's really well said.
And like that takes courage for you to be like, you know what? I can't control this, but I'm going to give tools.
Yes.
Right? I'm going to teach, I'm going to model, I'm going to be there, I'm going to be that place, but I'm going to allow them to grow.
Yeah.
You know, because you can't, I mean, a tree in a greenhouse will grow really well until it starts hitting the roof of the greenhouse and mangling in on itself, right?
Right.
We have to like grow roots and trust that these roots can.
Yeah, that's part of it. Not keeping them in a protected little space or bubble. But yeah, having them go out into the world. And again, it's the same thing that I've always wanted for my kids. I just have to look at it differently, which is I want to have confident, kind, good kids out into the world, making a positive effect in whatever sphere that they're in. Right. And I and a lot of that has to do with, you know, letting go. And that's another thing that I'm grieving, you know, as my kids get older and I'm looking at being an empty nester, and that phase of life going, that has been a different shift. And I've seen now my role as a mom is changing. And I do think that when they can go out into the world and I don't know what their path is going to be. I know it's going to be exciting and I want a front row to it, obviously, but I can be that safe space that they can come home to. There will always be someone with, Mom, can you believe this? Yeah, no, I can't believe it. Tell me everything. You know what I mean? I can be that safe space or a literal space for them to gather to bring their friends. You know, they have friends. All of my kids do, who on some level and another, their friends have been estranged or separated from, maybe against their will, from their parents or their family of origin, which is just absolutely heartbreaking for me. I can be a place where they can come and no questions asked, just feel the love of that kind of mom energy. Yeah. Absolutely. Anytime. And again, my privilege to be such. And that happens less and less as they, you know, get older and grow over, but everyone needs that. Every person needs that. You know, a place where they belong, a place where they are loved unconditionally, where they can be themselves. And I think that we can give that to each other, right? Like this is, you know, that's why I love the conversations that you guys have, because I feel like you are trying to say, hey, we need more of these spaces. We need more of these people that are saying, oh, here, I'll do it, you know, because everyone needs that kind of connection. And it's so much easier to become lonely and isolated in our society. And generationally, we're seeing that it becoming more and more likely, just all things considered equal. So we need to be more vigilant about it. We get to. To me, it's just like, it's so fun too. I can't imagine why somebody wouldn't want to.
Yeah, what I heard you say, Lisa, was there's this loss I'm experiencing of like my children being at home and needing me, and I can be a mom to other people. And so there's like the loss is still real, and yet there's ways you can compensate for that loss and still contribute.
Yeah.
A thought's been coming to my mind, and I haven't shared this before. I live with a 91-year-old widow. People know that. But I've had this fear for a long time that like she and my mom will die at the same time. I don't know why that's been like that I'd lose them at the same time. And I was writing my journal a few days ago, and I just like sat and just like thought about like Charlotte dying, and I was like crying writing my journal a few days ago. And I feel like I've like experienced her loss a lot already, because I'll just be like mowing the lawn and she'll come out and say something, then she'll go inside and I'll be like, Charlotte's gonna be gone someday. And it just like makes me cry like while mowing the lawn.
Oh, I love
like
that.
I probably cried about her dying a few hundred times. Like an absurd amount. And so sometimes I feel like this grief that I'm feeling, like she's still here And maybe she and my mom won't die at the same time. Like that's unlikely. But still there's that fear and that grief that I have that hasn't even happened yet. So what would you say to someone who's like, I'm sad and I'm grieving, but the grief feels silly to me? Like I should just get over this.
Oh, I would never call anybody's grief like what they're really feeling like silly or anything, because I do feel again that like grief is closely tied to love. It's to love, right? Like that's what it is. If you didn't love that person, it wouldn't matter. And it is our privilege to love, and it does come at a cost, right? Like it does, but again, it's our privilege to do it. In my worst moments of grief, in my worst moments, I look back and I think, in fact, one of my friends asked me that right after Chris died, if you would know everything now that you've been through, that you guys have been through together, that you're experiencing, the feeling that you're feeling right now, would you go back? Would you change it? Would you not marry him? Would you not, I was like, absolutely not. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. She's like, well, there you go. You never have to like think about that or worry about that. And I think about that all the time when I feel super, super sorry for myself. I think it was my privilege. It was my privilege to love him the same way that it's my privilege to love my kids, to be in their lives in whatever way for however long I can. And it's worth it. It's worth whatever future pain. It's tears. It's worth it. And so it's not silly. It's really brave, and it shows how much you love. And that is a gift. That is a gift, because I have no doubt in my mind that, I said, grief changes you, right? And people think, oh, like for the worst. It can for people. It's like, you feel like it's like on a razor's edge, right? But what I hope in my best moments is that it has cracked me wide open, and that I can love better, and I can love more, and I can love deeper.
Yeah.
And I see that, like, as you were talking about how you feel about these women who have absolutely changed your life and have given you this kind of love that you feel like you don't ever want to be without. And then you in turn I just feel like it's such a great opportunity. Like you will be that, like someone will be writing in their journal and crying about someday you're going to have to die, because everyone dies. Yeah. That's how I talk now. Everyone dies. You guys know, you have your own headstone, because I do. Anyway. Well, no, but somebody will be crying over that for you. Yeah. And there's something really beautiful about that like connects us as humans.
Yeah, I heard something on a podcast recently where the guest said that you can't love without loss. Like if you love someone at some point, either they're going to go or you're going to go. Like there's going to be loss no matter what.
I always say, I don't know, when people don't like to talk about death and loss and stuff, I'm like, I don't know what everyone's thinking. It's not like you're going to be the couple on the Titanic that just embraces on the bed and you just both die together. Like nobody gets that, except for that couple
and in
on
the
that
Notebook.
movie. And the Notebook. Yeah, like give me a break. It's just not going to happen.
Wait, Hollywood's not real?
Listen, we can't get into that right now. I wish. Yeah. It's just an interesting thing to consider how it connects us all.
I keep thinking about the capital G, lowercase g, grief. I think that's so important. And I've also heard you say like anticipatory disappointment, anticipatory pain, like anticipatory lost hope. And I just wonder if that is helpful for someone who is dealing with the lowercase g. And I don't want it to sound dismissive, right?
No, not at all.
But like, I wonder if it's helpful to be like, okay, there's this grief, but like, what is it actually? Like, I'm feeling disappointment. And just like, some of this is like grief is like super complex, right? And it has all of these different aspects. So I wonder if sometimes I'm feeling like, oh, I'm grieving this, but it's like actually a little bit more simpler than grief. And if I take it for what it actually is and just be like, oh, it's this aspect of grief, that'll help me sit with it rather than call it grief. And then I'm like, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, sometimes words and meanings of words change over time, right?
Yeah.
And because no one owns the English language, it's changing all the time. And so when you're really trying to understand somebody and what they're going through, whether they use the word grief or disappointment or loss or regardless, it's something difficult and hard. So that's why meeting them where they are, I think, is so much more helpful than trying to like fill in the spaces for them on their behalf. And one thing that when you were talking about like how could that be helpful, how could you use that, that popped into my mind is, when you're a parent, you want everything for your kid, right? You want the very best because they're your kid and they deserve it. And as you grow older, you realize because time physics, money, everything is limited, certain doors become closed, right, to them. Like they're not going to be an Olympic gymnast, you know.
I'm still trying to be okay with that one myself.
Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, when like literally, and this is like, you think they're going to win the Nobel Prize, or they're going to be, you know, we give them these big dreams, right? We put so much on them. And so this idea that you can raise kids without any expectation of what their life is going to be like is really unrealistic, right? And it reminds me of, you know, Carl Jung used to, you know, he famously talked about how that nothing, you know, affects the psychology of a kid more than the unlived life of their parent, right? Like we, like, and we don't need to get into all of that.
So are you saying that I'm going to force my kid to be an Olympic gymnast?
I'm just saying.
What? I've never thought
that
of that.
all of the things that, like, I've thought about this as I've raised kids. I'm like, I don't want to, like, I think it's unrealistic. Like we want the best for them, right? Like my young son could name all the planets in order when he was 2, and I was like, oh, he's going to work. He's an astronaut. No, I was like, this is what he's going to do. He's so smart, and this is how he's going to live his life. Like we all do that to some extent, and so I don't want to diminish how anyone feels when they're like, oh, I was not expecting this life path for my kid, right? If they come out, or if they, if this is something that is difficult for someone else or whatever, just because you haven't imagined, it hasn't. But the difference, and the thing that I would say that could be helpful, I would hope, is that there's lots of things, yes, that we think and we have imagined and brainstormed for our children that we want, lots of good things. But it doesn't mean that the life that they will actually live, or the life that they will actually choose, is any less great, isn't a good thing.
Yeah.
We're not saying I want all the good things. So I've already thought about all the good things, so all the other things are bad. You know, it's like, well, no, it's just just because you haven't thought about it or imagined it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
That is so special. I'm so glad you said that.
And we love a person, not the idea of a person.
Yeah. Thank you. I've been trying to put words to that for a while now. That was so beautifully articulated.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think like when I was 23 and like really struggling and like wondering like my life is just going to be sad and lonely forever.
Right, right.
And like if someone said, Ben, you have no idea what your life is going to be. It's going to be wonderful. I would have been like, yeah, but how? And
sure.
Yeah, because you can't think of it. You know, we always forget the scriptures where it says God's ways are mysterious. We always forget that. We think, no, we know because we've got it all restored. And you're like, no, you don't know everything. That's the whole idea to faith, right? Like you don't know. And because we have a negativity bias, we always just assume because we haven't imagined it, it'll be horrible, but it could be good.
Yeah.
And it will be. And I think that's why the delineation between lowercase grief and uppercase grief is so clear to me, because with one, there's hope. Oh, I don't know. And with the other, there's no hope. Well,
yeah,
for now.
The ambiguous, like you're saying, there's like still there's hope in the ambiguity. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Whereas on the other one, it's like not ambiguous loss. Like
we say don't have hope and faith in an outcome. We don't do performative spirituality. We say have faith and hope in Christ.
Right.
And that to me is where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
Because with Christ, all things are possible. How? I don't understand. I can't imagine everything. Well, yeah, that's the point. That is the point if we really believe and trust in Christ.
Yeah. And when I look at my life, the times when I was grieving what I thought I would have, a wife, kids, a temple marriage, an easy social situation, I'm like, I feel like Christ led me to here, and it's like so much better.
But you didn't imagine it.
Never.
Right?
Like not even.
You just
like
did the next
even my
right
husband,
thing.
I would never have imagined the things about him that are just so good for me, because I couldn't have, right?
Right.
But in order to get there, like, and who knows how many times I messed up, right? But like, I feel like the things that got me here were the moments when I was like, this is where I'm at and I'm with Christ right now. And that's what led me. So that in the moment, the mindfulness, I think that's important.
Living in the present, doing the next right thing, and letting that take care of itself, and not being so focused on the future. You know, we make goals, we plan for the future. I save for retirement. You know, I do all these things that are future focused, but really like living in the present and not getting caught up in, again, our imagination of what we imagine the future might be. Now, that's easier said than done, right? Like I still do it. I'm like, oh, I'm a widow at this age, and I'm going to be sad and lonely forever. And well, maybe not. Mm-hmm. And actually like allowing myself for like to have the hope, like amazing, wonderful things have happened since Christopher's death, which makes me feel sort of weird and unmoored. But I know he would get a kick out of that. You know what I mean? Like, and there, it's a lot of things instead of just one thing. We want to categorize it, but like allowing for that hope is an exciting thing. And so especially for parents who are concerned, worried, disappointed, whatever word they want to use about their kid coming out because they don't know. And that feeling is real because it maybe wasn't their experience at all. Right. And so, your kids get older and they're their own people from the get-go, but you're just discovering it more. You want to feel connected with them. You feel connected less and less as they get older, and you want to have more in common with them. And so in those moments when you're feeling like, oh, I don't understand that, just get curious. Asking better questions instead of jumping to conclusions is a really great way to create that kind of closeness with your kids.
Lisa, one of the things that you have said again, which I really want to take into my own life is I want to be the kind of person that like my friends can just call and I'll just be there with them. Like for those 8 minutes, they can say whatever they want and I'll just be there. And I also want to like thank the people who I know are that for me. Like I have people who I know I can just call them, I can say whatever, and they will be there for me. And so just like, thank you for your wisdom and your wit and your experience and for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, I really appreciate thanks for being willing to show us some of the heart that cracked open.
Thank you.
It's amazing and scary and crazy in there probably, but it is beautiful. And I'm really grateful that you brought it here today.
I have one more question. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Let's keep going if you want to.
Yeah.
And then
we're not rushing grief, Ben. We're not rushing grief.
Never.
Did your husband want you to get remarried? And do you want to get remarried?
You do not have to answer that.
It's okay. He wanted me to. He talked about it very specifically. And I didn't know this until about 3 or 4 months after he passed. He had spoken, typed out because he couldn't speak, to each one of my kids about it and said, listen, I want your mom to get remarried. I think this life is too hard to go it alone. And I really want that. So don't make it hard for her. He kind of said that to the kids. Isn't that really beautiful?
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. When we first talked about it, because when you have a terminal disease, you talk about everything, right? And at first at first we were like, I can't even talk about this. Like we set up this trust and it was like, well, if you get remarried, and we were like, it just made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't even think about it. Then about 9 months before he passed, he's like, I really want to talk about this. And we just he said all of the things. And I realize now it was a real gift because he was saying, this is how you don't, not living, keeping yourself from more experiences and relationships, and that is not truly living. Like going and trying to preserve everything is not the way. And I also know that love grows. It doesn't.
Love moves.
It does. I think of it in such a different way, and I hope one day to be able to have a second chapter. I really do want to get remarried. I have learned so much about love and relationships. Like I can't pretend now that I don't think it's important, or that I don't value it, or that it's not like what this life is all about. So
is that part of the reason you're on this show today? Because you know that a lot of our listeners are straight, eligible men.
I was going to say, for all of you straight, eligible men who have good taste in music. Oh my gosh.
That's our demographic.
Right? I know. I should have come up with a different plan. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to get somebody else's podcast.
I didn't say I was good at it, but I was just said I was open to it.
You know what? Actually, I will give you some advice.
I need better advice.
Well, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, you bet.
And Ben, if you ever need 8 minutes, I'm here for you. But if you want 7, you're going to have to go find somebody else.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie.
That's hilarious.